Hello, good day, and welcome to our webcast From Occupational Stress to Mental Resilience. My name is Gaby Reisger, I'm your host for today, and next to me I have here Esther Wechter-Hilbers. Welcome.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit more about your role here at Human Capital Care.
Well, thank you, Gaby. My name is Esther Wechter-Hilbers, indeed, and I'm an employment and organization advisor for about 8 years now within Human Capital Care. And what I do is mainly advising the larger companies in the region of Eindhoven on health and well-being. And then one of the topics we hear most about these days is stress and resilience. And that's what I talk about to them also.
Yes, thank you. And that's also what we're going to talk about today, of course, occupational stress and mental resilience. Before we start, I would like to explain a little bit more about this webcast. Of course, this is a webcast, so it's not live, but you are able to ask us questions within the chat box in your screen. Those questions will be sent to our colleagues, and afterwards they will be, of course, answered, and you will get a reply from us. So please do ask questions, even though we're not answering them live for you today. The other thing I have to tell you, of course, is the presentation. You will see the presentation during this webcast, and afterwards we'll send the presentation to you as well. So don't worry, it'll be in your inbox as soon as possible. Okay, so let's start the webcast about occupational stress. Esther, a little while ago in the newspaper, we had this topic. Since 2015, we actually see that absenteeism or employees are more absent from psychological complaints compared to physical complaints.
Yes.
So that's a new trend.
Yes, that's quite a difference to what we saw before, because this is indeed an article that was in the newspaper in 2015. I translated it a bit for you. It's still also in Dutch, but it's saying most occupational absence caused by psychological maladies. And what is with this thing is that in 2015 we saw that no longer the physical complaints and the physical maladies were causing the most absence days, but it were the psychological maladies, and that's quite a difference. We saw the trends, we saw the lines crossing each other.
Yes.
And what we see now is that still physical, psychological maladies are taking over in comparison to the more physical complaints.
Right.
Yes.
So it's a new trend, basically,
Yeah.
and it's a little bit reversed from what we saw in the past. It's increasing the psychological complaints within employees here. What's the cause of it? So how come we see this trend?
Well, if it was that simple, and I would really like to give you an answer immediately, but it's difficult, because what we see are two developments that are very much of influence. And the first one is changes in our society. What we see is that there's a different vision on health and on diseases. If we look back for about a century, I think about 100 years ago, nobody talked even about psychological maladies. We had hysteria, and that was only for women, I believe. But mainly, if you were ill or you were not feeling well, it was caused by physical complaints. And we see that that's changing over the time. There's room in society for a place in society for mental diseases. We see commercials on television now about depression. I think it's a Hey commercial on talk about your depression. So we are more open about the psychological maladies, and that also offers some space for people with those kind of complaints to tell their employees that they can't work anymore because of these complaints. A really practical example is, for instance, that we had about 10 years ago, we had quite an explosion of people with complaints of repetitive strain injury. And we saw it purely as a physical issue, and the same complaints we see now more as a stress-related issue, because we know now that that repetitive strain injury, what caused pain in the arms, neck and shoulders, is not really caused by muscles or something, but it's caused by stress and stress in the neck. So there too we say, well, it's no longer a physical complaint, but it's actually a stress-related mental complaint. What we also see is that there's quite a change in social media. There's globalization, and that what that does to people is that everyone sees from the other ones how they feel. And well, in general, what people show on social media is not their entire life, but it's only the best parts of their life. So there are quite some people that see things like that, and they feel like, well, my life is not half as nice as the life of other people. So it's not good enough, and I need to try harder, and I want to be there too. So that causes also some mental strain and stress. Third one is our definition of success and visibility. I think we live now in a community, in a society where we think everything is feasible. If you work hard enough, if you try hard enough, if you give enough of yourself, then you can become anything and everything can be solved. Well, unfortunately, that's not the case. But we do talk about it like it is. If we look at cancer, what we see now is that people talk about fighting cancer, but is it really about fighting an illness, or is it about having the best doctors available, having the right medication available? Is it because you live in a country like the Netherlands that you have a large chance to recover from an illness like that? So we think about feasibility, and like our influence on things is really large. However, I think in reality, the influence we really have on our life and on life events is maybe not as large as we think it is, not as big as we think it is. And last but not least is, of course, the 24-hour economy. There's so much to do, there's so much we want, there's so much we can do during the 24 hours in a day that I think most people don't have enough in those 24 hours. And sometimes it also causes that we don't take good enough care of ourselves. Sleeping is maybe even seen as a waste of time. While sleeping is something that can really help you to prevent getting psychological malady. So the 24-hour economy can be really nice and can serve you very well, but it can also cause some stress because you want to be alert all the time. So that's from society. Then there's something else, that's what we see, changes in the work environment. And what we see there is that also, again, if we look back 1 century, then we see that we were a state with a lot of industry. Nowadays, we see a lot of service provision. So it asks a lot from people to change from working with your hands to working in an environment that asks a lot on communication, on mental skills. And we see that too by the way we are working. There's a lot more increased self-management. There's a lot more individual planning. Nowadays, we expect from most employees that they are able to manage themselves, manage their work, manage their environment even, to plan things, to have autonomy, to work on themselves, to work out plans, do project management, things like that. And however, well, even if it makes the work we're doing maybe nicer for some people, for others that's really, really bringing a lot of stress. Because it's not everybody likes self-management. Not everybody likes to plan all things by themselves. But it is asked more and more. Well, we see also an increased need for social and cognitive skills in people, in employees. And that means that if you're not so social, and it's not so easy for you to communicate with everyone, and if you're not such an outgoing and open you don't have an open personality, then you really need to work hard to get things done and to show those skills and to be there. And the cognitive skill even, well, if you take a look at primary schools these days, what we want is all our kids going to Atheneum or maybe gymnasium even, because that's how we define success. Success is if you're able to learn well and if you can achieve great things and go to university later. Whilst we do need a lot of people that are just doing other things. we don't need all those scientists only, because then nothing will get done in our society. But it looks like we forget it. So for us, success is being really social and outgoing and have a lot of cognitive skills. And that puts a lot of pressure on people. Well, last but not least is that we work in quite a more efficient way. And the work we are doing is more intense than it was before. And that just simply means that we do a lot more work with a lot less people. So the production is even higher, but the number of people we produce it with is a lot less. And that too is making work, well, sometimes too stressful and is asking too much from people.
Right. So just to sum up a little bit, due to changes within society, but also in the work environment and the way we work, we're a lot more prevalent, or stress is a lot more prevalent within our society and for employees. So it's something we have to deal with, because it won't become any less. It probably will even become more and more. So it's something we need to have attention for. That's quite clear. I just wonder what you think about the next question. This is a question we asked our Dutch audience in the webinar in a poll question, so they could answer straight away. But since it's quite important information, I do like to show you this question, and just to see what you think and what the actual answer is. Might open your eyes a little more on how much we need to pay attention to this topic. So what percentage of the absenteeism among employees under the age of 35 is caused by psychological maladies? So we gave 4 answers, A, B, C, D, 20, 40, 60 or 80%. And just to show you how much it actually is a problem. Esther, could you tell a little bit more about the actual answer?
Yeah, I'll start with telling you a little bit more about the question, because it's the percentage of absenteeism days. So it's not a number of times people are falling ill, but it's the absenteeism days. And well, what you see, especially by employees under the age of 35, is that about 80% of all the absenteeism days are caused by psychological maladies. So that's enormous.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Yes. Of all the people that younger than 35 years that fall ill, well, if you look at the total day of absence, then you see that 80% of these days is caused by psychological malady. And that's the most for this group, the younger people. And what we see in this group is that they ask so much of themselves, and they have such strong beliefs in the feasibility of life, and the expectations are so high on society, on work, on themselves mainly, that they get disappointed a lot, especially in the first years at work. So for this group, it's really important for you as a manager to be realistic and talk to them about what they expect and what they want to be to reach, and also to explain to them that if you want to be successful, and if you want to make a career, and if you want to achieve something within work, that it will take quite some years before you get, for instance, a CEO. And what is the difference? Why we ask this question is because we saw at first these kind of numbers, more or less within the people between 35 and 55 years. And then we said, well, they have a lot of absence due to psychological malady, probably because of their, they are making a career, they're buying a house, they are having the kids. But what you see in this younger group, they don't even have children in general. They don't even have a house. It's just work that's causing so much stress already. Well, imagine what happens if they also get children and they also have to buy a house or get a mortgage or anything like that. I'm afraid it will only rise.
Yes, yes. So it's, well, hopefully, I believe we've shown how big the problem is, and it may become even a bigger problem for employers to deal with stress, occupational stress. But before we start about how to deal with it, is stress always negative? What is stress exactly? How do we define stress?
Well, if we talk about stress, we actually talk about a really normal reaction to an unusual situation. And that is what stress is. And what it causes is that you have a peak in hormones. And these hormones are like adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol, and they make you really alert and they really make you focused. So it helps you to peak at that moment that you really need it. If you've ever been in a car accident, maybe a near car accident, what happens is if you see all the other people in front of you brake, you also hit the brake and you feel it throughout your entire body. You feel the tingling in your fingers and maybe even on the entire skin. And what you feel then is adrenaline, cortisol, it's coming free in your body, is floating all around it, and it makes you quite alert. You can look in the front and you can look at your back at the same time. Well, that's how you feel it, and you're really noticing all that's happening around you. And as soon as that's over and the danger is gone away, what happens then is that you lose all of those hormones again, and there gets even a point that you feel really tired because it's asking a lot of your body. So you feel tired and you need to take some time off and relax a little bit. But that's okay, because it's a normal physical reaction to an unusual situation. Well, what happens if you get chronic stress? What you see then is that the stress levels don't decrease anymore. They stay up high. And you don't feel it anymore in your body, so much as you do when it's a sudden reaction. But we can measure it, and you can see that your heart rate is slightly higher, your blood pressure is a bit higher, but also your hormones are still there. So you still have a lot of cortisol and maybe even adrenaline in your body, and it's not going away anymore. So you're peaking all of the time, and that's a chronic stress situation, and that's not good for your body. It's wearing it out.
Right. So what's quite clear from your story is that under unusual circumstances, we experience stress, which is quite clear. Unfortunately, we do not, unfortunately, I do not want to be in a car accident, but it's quite clear that you experience stress. Under normal circumstances at work, you don't have those signals, right? So you don't experience that alertness at that moment, which you do have in a car accident. Yeah. How do we notice? So what are the most important things to actually alert yourself? Or
I understand your question. Yes. Well, if it's not about, if you don't feel it in your body, like you did in the example I gave you, if you don't feel it in your body, it's good to look not so much on what you're feeling, but on the situation where you're in. And then it's also important to understand what resilience is. Well, resilience is the ability to properly deal with the loss of control. And that's what this is about. When do you feel stressed? That's when you lose control. When you don't have the grip on the situation anymore. And that's what's causing then this enormous amount of stress continuously during a longer period of time. So it's good for you as yourself to look at the situation where you're in. Do I still feel that I'm in control of my work, and that I'm in control of my private life, and that those two are in a balance? And if I'm not in control, it can be for 1 day or maybe 2 days, but do I feel resilient enough to overcome the situation and to get back on track and regain control again? So that's what this is about. It's about looking at your own situation and be really critical and take a look at your work, take a look at your situation at home. And for instance, ask yourself, do I still allow myself to take time off just to do nothing, maybe to play sports, maybe to go out with friends? Or are those kind of things out of your life? Have they left your life somewhere? Maybe even without you really noticing it, because you were too busy to do your sports, or you were too busy to having a drink with your friends or go to your family in the weekends. Ask yourself these kind of questions. So is my work controlling me, or am I in control of my work?
Okay. So loss of control, that's one of the things that triggers me. Being able to get that, to regain the control again, but also deliberately thinking about, am I still in balance with the things I love to do beside working, to relax, to enjoy, or are those things that I've downgraded a little bit to the background, so I'm able to actually do my work.
You downgraded it maybe, or you maybe even feel guilty about it.
Right.
Guilty about taking time
Right.
off for yourself, and maybe even feeling guilty about going to sports because there's so much work that needs to be done. And of course, if you really look at a situation like that from an outsider perspective, you think, well, that's too strange. But I think there are a lot of people that recognize themselves in a situation that they actually feel guilty about taking time for themselves and do something just for themselves, not for the kids, not for work, not for your spouse or anyone else, but just for yourself, taking some time off and just relax. I think there are even people here that feel guilty when they just put their bottoms on the couch in the evening and watch TV for an hour. Yeah. So.
Okay, so this is, we've now talked about aside from work, but at work there are also positive factors, of course, which can help regaining control, becoming resilient. I'm going back to the audience because we have another question for you. Of course, it's not a live question, but I do want you to think about it just to see, so what do I think or feel is important at the work environment? So the question is, in your opinion, what's the most important positive factor at work for well-being at work? 5 categories or 5 answers: work content, clearly defined roles, leadership, social support, or autonomy. A lot of answers here, Esther, different answers. What do you think about these answers? How do we answer this question?
Well, I think it's a pity that you could only tick one of the boxes in the other webinar, because I think they're all quite right. And that has to do with the fact that it's not so much on the work content or the definition of the roles or the leadership, but it's on how you experience things. And that's what this model is showing you. It's a job demands resources model. And what it states here is that you have some stresses at work and you have energy resources at work. But what you also have, and that's in the middle, that's the gray picture, is your personal resources. And that's your experience, that's your character. And that's how you feel about the things that are happening to you. So if you're in a situation, you have a lot of grip and you've got quite some control over the situation, then a heavy workload is not such a big thing. You can handle it. And maybe you even like it because you know I can make career with it. And if it comes to with autonomy and you can do it in the times that you like it, and it gives you the possibility to grow and to develop yourself, that's all right. And then you don't feel stress. Maybe it's stressful, but it's the positive energy and it's not wearing you out. So what this model is saying is that all the things that we saw on the other slide, on the former slide, whether it's about work content, whether it's about role definition or leadership, it can be positive and negative, but it's your experience, your character, that's making all the difference.
Right.
However, what we do see in almost all research is that leadership, if you have a manager that takes some time to talk to you, that knows what you're doing, that's supportive, that's definitely a really big source of energy for almost all people.
Yes. So a supportive leader being there for you is necessary, is one of the most important things, basically. But all answers are correct, basically, if I hear correctly. So we know now how big the issue is. We have a little bit more insight on what stress is and what we need to do to, well, not need to do, but where it comes from. What's your advice to managers? How do they go from here? Where do they go from here?
Well, what people really need from a manager is also from an organization, but mainly from the manager, is appreciation. And they need to know appreciation and feedback. They need to know the things that I am doing, are those the right things? But also, am I doing it in the right way? And that's one thing. But what they also need from the manager is support, and also on their social side. And how do you do that as a manager? Well, it's quite simple said, easily said than done. It's about making time for the people you manage. It's about making time for your employees. And why do I say it sounds simple, easier said than done? That's because I talk to a lot of managers that say, well, I'm a manager now, but I only have time to manage the output and I don't have time to manage my employees. Well, I think that's something organizations should really think about, because the first priority of managers should be to support their employees so that they can do their work. Well, if you have some time to talk to your employees, please talk to them about what occupies them, and do it on the work side, but also do it on the private side, because people can't split themselves in two and have a work part and a private part. They take things with them to work, as well as they take work with them to their private life, to their houses. So talk to them. What's bothering them? What do they need? What do they expect? What do they want? And if you talk to them, maybe you recognize some signs of stress, and you can talk about those too. And you can stimulate resilience. If you see things that that are enhancing the stress within someone, maybe their character, you can talk about it, and you can stimulate them to be more resilient and maybe say no more often. And the last thing, but we'll come back to that later, is to encourage relaxation at work. That's one thing you can do too.
Okay, so it's clear, and simultaneously it's still quite abstract, right? Mm-hmm. One of the things we do hear a lot is, I don't have time for having conversations with all of my employees. Also, they're in their comfort zone when it's about work content, but then I have to have a conversation about maybe private things with my employees. It's a different skill, or at least it's quite hard. So one of the questions managers often ask is, so what do I talk about? Yeah. How do I start a conversation like that?
Well, I think that's really a good point, because we often make someone a manager based on the way they did their job, and not based on so much on social skills. So I think maybe we expect too much of our managers sometimes, and we should support them more in development of soft skills, on how to talk to people. And I give a lot of training on those topics, and one of the things I use then is the Shape a Burnout model. And what you see here is that there are quite some topics you can talk about that are of influence on the outcomes, on how people feel. And those are things quite in the present about private life and work, but also in the past. You could talk to people about their age, about life events that are happening to them. You could talk to them about the character, and there are stress enhancers and the stress reducing character traits, but also about some habits, about sleeping, about relaxation, about exercise, and just about their health. And if you talk about these topics, and then you also talk, for instance, about their relationship, their children, how they deal with maybe a divorce. If you just ask to them, how are you doing? That's a question that's an open question. People can give their answers. It can tell you as much as they like, and still you get a chance to see if there are any signals of stress that you need to deal with, and that you can help them on.
Okay, so this is quite useful to actually know what to talk about. But then when you're in a conversation, employees may always either not know their own necessity to work on their resilience yet. What do they look for if you have a conversation with their employees? What signs do they need to?
Well, if you look at the signs of stress, that's more if you have a conversation, and of course you understand what's going on, but if people don't like talking about it, then there are still some signs as a manager that you can see. And so it's about talking to your people and knowing what's going on, but it's also about looking at your people and understanding what's driving them and what's happening to them. And signs of stress are, for instance, the cognitive effects, emotional effects, and it's about a change of character mainly. What you see is that people that are under stress, they are showing a deteriorating memory, for instance, or the inability to concentrate. And before, several months ago maybe, they were quite capable to concentrate. They did not complain about their colleagues or about other people calling. So then you notice something has happened. What's happened there? Ask about it. You also see a difficulty with decision making, focusing only on the negative. We sometimes call it, if we talk to people about the grumpy old men you see in the Muppets, the ones
yes.
on the balcony, it's only about the negative. It's about talking about the organization without thinking in solutions.
Right.
So the inability to see things in perspective is also a big signal. And then on the emotional side, you see, well, people are moody, they don't have humor anymore, they're irritable. Cynical is really a big sign of burnout, people getting cynical and they talk and it's all bad and they really don't have the perspective anymore. Depressive feelings can be showing. But it can also be that you notice some physical effects. And physical effects are pain in back, neck and shoulders, nausea, dizziness, people with a lot of headaches. And it's not about people that have those headaches, have had those headaches all the time already, but it's when it starts at a certain point that you think, well, what happened here that they complain so much about this issue now? And if they don't feel find a cause for it, it's good to talk to them about it. Well, maybe it has to do with their work or with their total situation they are in. And then last, behavioral effects, it's change of eating habits, isolating oneself, not going with the others to the lunch anymore, and maybe even some nervous habits, like starting to smoke again, things like that. Well, of course, if you ask, what are the signs of stress? It's also nice to know what are the signs of resilience, and they're quite similar, but on the other side of the spectrum. And what you see then is that people that are resilient and that are doing really well are people with a lot of perspective, and they know how to focus and they know how to concentrate, and mainly they are realistic. They know they can't do it all in one day, and that good sometimes is just good enough. They can't be perfect. They are able to see the bigger picture, they focus on solutions, and they're quite optimistic in general. Of course, they have an off day too, but after one day, they can rethink it over and think, well, okay, this was an off day, and now we go ahead again. So they are, well, empathetic, they are satisfied with what they are doing, and they are also quite open, making contact to others. Physically, what you generally see is that those people are physically fit, mainly also well rested. They sleep well, they take time off, they sport, they take time to do some sports. They have quite a healthy lifestyle. They're not so often sick, and they're quite energetic. And then last but not least, the behavioral effects is that you see these people, they are quite flexible and spontaneous. You can ask them things, and even if it's not in their planning, they either can say no or they say, well, I'll see how to do it, and they can fit it into their program. So they are motivated and curious about solutions and about the future.
Right. Okay, so that's quite clear. Signals, signs of stress compared to the signs of resilience. Mm-hmm. For managers, good to pay attention to either in a conversation or noticing rumors or colleagues who are actually worried about certain colleagues. Previously, you also mentioned relaxation at work. So playing sports after work, it's quite common, or at least that's what we think about when we talk about relaxation. But during a workday is really different. And I believe we have a nice video for our viewers to actually see an example of how to relax at work, and how one of our other departments were actually have filled that in. So we want to show you that.
We at Human Capital Care wanted to be more active ourselves too. So we asked some students from Fontys Hogeschool in Eindhoven to help us on finding ways to get more active during a workday. And one of the things they introduced was a moment of activity. It's only 5 minutes twice a day, in which we start to be active just together as a team. And it's fun. We do it twice a day still, since a year now. And it's really nice to get your blood running throughout the day with your colleagues.
So I hope you've enjoyed that video. It's an example of how to actually incorporate relaxation at work. Of course, there are many other examples to think of. Most importantly is what fits you, what fits your team, what fits your employee. So just think about it, have it on the agenda and discuss it. This was also the last thing we would of this webcast actually. So just to recap this webcast, we started with how big the issue is and why we actually really need to pay attention to this topic. We've explained to you what stress is. It's not only negative, but it becomes negative when it's chronic and we cannot recover from it anymore. We've discussed signs of stress and how it actually works to become more resilient and to cope with stress. I hope you've had enough and sufficient information, but of course we are always here to answer more questions and to help you further to incorporate these important things at work for you. Thank you for your attention. Esther, thank you as well for your expertise on this topic, and hope to see you next time. Goodbye.